There is a 13-foot Burmese python lying in the dirt near Naples, Florida, and its head has been torn clean off. December 2022. A discovery that left a team of seasoned wildlife biologists standing in silence over the body. For 6 years, these researchers with the Conservancy of Southwest Florida had been tracking this one snake, a giant they had named Loki, a name that was about to mean something in these swamps. He mattered to them, and not only because of his size, but when they followed his radio signal to a patch of conservation land that cold December morning, they found his body half buried under a pile of pine needles, the head and neck gnawed away, hidden nearby like evidence someone was trying to bury. Whatever did this was not afraid of a snake that swallows alligators and full-grown deer whole. And that single decapitated body was about to expose a hidden war playing out in the Everglades, right under our noses. But before I tell you what was strong enough to behead Loki, you need to understand how Florida ended up overrun by these monsters in the first place. I'm Ambrose Wild, and this is the kind of story the swamp doesn't usually let anyone see. What makes Loki's death almost impossible to believe is the track record. For roughly 25 years, across the entire recorded history of the python invasion in Florida, nothing native to this state had ever been documented killing a giant one. These animals arrived without a single natural enemy on the continent. So to understand why one dead snake made scientists stop and stare, you have to see what these creatures did to this place first. Burmese pythons are not supposed to be here. They come from the jungles and grasslands of Southeast Asia, and they are among the largest snakes on Earth, capable of passing 18 feet in length and weighing over 200 pounds at the extreme end. In the 1980s and 1990s, they became a status symbol in the American exotic pet trade. A baby python is a gentle little thing, the width of a pencil, easy to hold in one hand, and pet shops across Florida sold them by the thousands. The problem is what that pencil grows into. Within a few years, that adorable hatchling becomes a 12-foot predator that eats rabbits whole and outgrows any tank a hobbyist can build. Overwhelmed owners did the thing wildlife officials begged them not to do. They drove out to the edge of the Everglades and let them go. Then came the accelerant. In August 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore across South Florida as one of the most violent storms in American history. It flattened buildings, and among the things it destroyed were breeding facilities and reptile warehouses on the edge of the wild. When the walls came down, an unknown number of pythons slid out into exactly the habitat they had been waiting for. Nobody planned it. Nobody could have stopped it. The snakes were simply loose now, in a place that felt like home. And Florida was paradise. The climate matched their native range almost perfectly. The wetlands gave them endless water and cover to hide and hunt. Prey animals had spent their entire evolutionary history never once seeing a predator like this, so they had no instinct to fear it, no defense against it. Most importantly, there was nothing in the Everglades that hunted an adult python. No wolves, no big constrictors, nothing. Imagine dropping a perfect ambush predator into a world that has no idea it exists. That is what happened, and the snakes did what perfect predators do. They multiplied. Today, biologists estimate there are tens of thousands, and by some counts, hundreds of thousands of Burmese pythons spread across South Florida. And here is a number that should stop you cold. Researchers believe only about 1% of the pythons out there are ever seen or captured by a human being. For every giant snake pulled out of the marsh, roughly 99 more are hiding in the sawgrass, where no one will ever find them. The population you can measure is a rounding error against the population you cannot. What that army of snakes did to the Everglades is one of the fastest ecological collapses ever documented in North America. A landmark study published in 2012 laid it out in numbers that are hard to even process. Researchers drove nearly 57,000 kilometers of Everglades roads at night, counting animals, the same way they had for years. In the areas where pythons had taken hold, raccoon sightings had dropped by 99.3%, opossums by 98.9%, bobcats by 87.5%. Marsh rabbits, cottontail rabbits and foxes were not declining. They were simply gone. Not detected at all. An entire layer of the food web that had existed for thousands of years erased in about a decade. For a while, some scientists argued the snakes could not really be the cause. A single predator wiping out that many species at once seemed almost impossible, so researchers ran an experiment to settle it. They fitted marsh rabbits with radio collars and released them into python country to watch what actually killed them. The answer was brutal and fast. Within 11 months, pythons had killed 77% of the rabbits that died, and a year later, there was no rabbit population left in the study area at all. The snakes were not just present during the collapse, the snakes were the collapse. These animals are eating machines with almost no upper limit. A python's jaw is not a single hinged bone like yours. The two halves of its lower jaw are connected only by a stretchy ligament at the chin, so the mouth can spread far wider than the width of the snake's own skull, and the ribs flex to let oversized prey pass down the body. That anatomy is why the size ceiling on what they eat is so terrifying. In late 2022, the very team that tracked Loki published the first photographs ever taken of a Burmese python in the act of swallowing a full-grown white-tailed deer in Florida, an animal that outweighed the snake that was eating it. Pythons have also been documented killing and swallowing alligators, the one native heavyweight everyone assumed sat at the top of this food chain. The running list of species found inside Florida pythons has now climbed to around 85 different animals, everything from tiny songbirds to wading birds to full-sized mammals. As the lead biologist on Loki's case put it, at this point it is easier to list what pythons are not eating than to list everything they are. And Florida has learned the hard way that you cannot simply import a fix. Other places that tried to solve one invasion by releasing a new predator usually just created a second invasion. The mongoose, released in Hawaii and the Caribbean to kill snakes, being the textbook disaster, since it ignored the snakes and ate native birds instead. So Florida has no cavalry to call. There is no animal anyone can drop into the Everglades to hunt the pythons for us without risking a whole new catastrophe. Whatever was going to challenge these snakes had to already live here. It had to come from inside the ecosystem the pythons were dismantling. And for 2.5 decades, nothing did. Now, hold on to that fact. Pythons eat bobcats. Remember it, because it is going to matter more than you think in a few minutes. Let me back up and tell you who Loki actually was, because he was not a random snake. He was a 13-foot, 52-pound male, and the biologists had turned him into a spy. Here is how it works, and it is genuinely clever. During the winter breeding season, male pythons go looking for females. So researchers capture a big, healthy male, surgically implant a radio transmitter, and release him back into the wild. Then they follow his signal. The male leads them straight to the breeding females, and the females are the real target, because a single female python can lay up to 100 eggs in one clutch. Kill one female, and you erase the next 100 snakes before they hatch. In the field, they call these tracked males scout snakes. Some biologists call them Judas snakes because they betray their own kind. For 6 years, Loki had been one of the most productive traitors in the program, leading his handlers to female after female. And the name fits even better than it sounds. In Norse myth, Loki was punished by being bound in a cave beneath a serpent whose venom dripped endlessly onto his head. A snake named for a story about a snake dripping poison onto a chained prisoner. The biologists have a sense of humour. If you are enjoying real stories the swamp usually keeps hidden, you're going to want to stick around for what the trail camera caught. And consider subscribing, because I dig up cases like this one every week. Now, back to that cold morning near Naples. The team had seen Loki just days earlier, and he was in prime condition, a strong, healthy animal at the peak of breeding season. So when his signal led them to that pile of debris, they expected the usual: Loki coiled up with a female. Instead, they found the body with the head and neck chewed off, and the carcass deliberately covered over with pine needles. And that detail, the burying, is what turned the dead snake into a case worth solving. Because in the Everglades, only a few animals kill something and then hide the leftovers to come back and finish later. That behaviour, called caching, points almost exclusively at wild cats. And in this part of Florida, that meant one of two suspects. Suspect one was the Florida panther. Powerful enough to take down a python easily, no question. But there was a problem. Florida panthers are among the rarest large animals in North America, with only around 200 left in the entire wild. The odds that one just happened to kill this particular tracked snake were slim. Suspect 2 was the bobcat, a cat that tops out around 25 to 30 pounds, which sounds absurd. Loki weighed 52 pounds, more than twice as much as any bobcat in the region. How does a house cat-sized predator behead a snake that eats deer? The biologists were not going to guess. They did what a detective does. They called in an expert, a wild cat specialist from the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and they set a trail camera on the body, betting that whatever cached it would come back to feed. Then they waited. The very next day, the camera fired, and slinking back through the brush toward Loki's buried body came an adult bobcat. Not a panther. A 25-pound bobcat. A cat half the weight of the snake it had killed. On the footage, you can watch it move with total confidence, sniffing the air, catching the researchers' lingering scent, checking its territory, and returning to its kill exactly the way a lion returns to a carcass on the savannah. Except this was not Africa. This was a small North American cat calmly reclaiming a giant it had no business defeating. As the lead biologist said, a 25-pound cat killed and cached a 52-pound python. Score 1 for the home team. But how? How does that math work? The answer comes down to one thing the python cannot control: its own temperature. Pythons are ectothermic, which is the technical word for cold-blooded. They cannot generate their own body heat the way a mammal does. Everything about how fast they can move, how hard they can strike, and how much power they can put into a constricting coil depends entirely on how warm the outside air is. In the days before Loki was found, a genuine cold snap had swept down through South Florida. And a tropical snake caught out in the cold does not just feel uncomfortable. Its metabolism drops toward idle, its muscles go slow and heavy, its reaction time falls apart, and its whole body drifts toward a kind of forced shutdown. This is exactly the weakness that makes a Florida winter one of the few natural checks on the invasion at all. Loki made it worse for himself. He was a male out roaming in the open looking for females, far from the warm underground burrow where he would normally ride out a cold spell when the temperature crashed. So the bobcat never faced a python at full power. It found an apex predator locked into slow motion, unable to strike or coil at anything close to its usual speed. And it took the opening. Nature handed the home team a narrow window, and for the first time on record in Florida, a bobcat walked through it. And here is where the story turns into something bigger than one lucky cat. Because that same bobcat species is one of the python's favorite victims. This is the fact I told you to hold on to. Pythons eat bobcats. This is not a guess. During a separate necropsy, the same research team cut open another Burmese python and found a set of bobcat claws sitting inside its stomach, the undigested remains of a cat the snake had swallowed. In that 2012 collapse survey, bobcats were the species that fell by 87.5%, one of the steepest drops of any animal counted. So the encounter near Naples was not just predator versus prey. It was a reversal of a relationship that normally runs the other way. The snakes hammer bobcats two different ways. The direct way is obvious. A big python will kill and swallow a bobcat, especially kittens, whole. The indirect way is quieter and maybe crueler. Pythons and bobcats hunt the exact same menu. The rabbits and rats and birds and opossums that have fed Florida's cats for thousands of years. When millions of pounds of snake move in and vacuum up that food, the bobcats slowly starve out. Fewer meals, fewer surviving kittens, fewer cats every year. The python does not even have to bite a bobcat to erase it. It just has to eat everything the bobcat needed. So sit with what actually happened by that pile of pine needles. A member of a species being wiped out by pythons, hunted directly and starved indirectly, turned around and killed one of the giants that had been erasing its kind. The prey became the predator. For one cold morning near Naples, the victim won. And Loki is not the only sign that the Everglades are learning. Researchers have begun documenting other native animals figuring out the invaders. Alligators, the one true heavyweight the swamp already had, are increasingly found killing and eating pythons, meeting the snake's ambush game with their own, and reminding everyone that the top of this food chain was never actually vacant. There are accounts of large wading birds and birds of prey taking young pythons and hatchlings that would never have been on the menu in the years right after the invasion began. Even the snake's own eggs and juveniles, once almost untouchable, have started showing up as food for native animals. None of this is coordinated. Nobody taught these animals to do it. It is raw adaptation happening in real time. A slow and scattered pushback against a predator that arrived holding every advantage. Each kill is a single data point on its own, but stacked together, they hint that Florida's natives are quietly stumbling onto the invaders' weaknesses. The cold snaps, the moment of distraction during breeding season, the vulnerability of the young. And unlike a human hunter with a bag limit, an animal that learns to eat pythons passes nothing on paper and everything in behavior to whatever watches it hunt. I want to be honest with you though, because the swamp does not do fairy tales. One beheaded python does not turn the war around. There are still tens of thousands of these snakes out there, and the vast majority will never be seen by a human, let alone challenged by a bobcat. The single most effective tool against the invasion is still people. It is the state-backed removal programs, the paid python contractors working the levees at night, the scout snakes like Loki quietly betraying the females, and the hunters pulling giant breeders out of the marsh before they can lay another clutch. And this is exactly why a scout snake was worth 6 years of surgery, tracking, and fieldwork in the first place. A single male leading researchers to a single female removed before she nests can erase 100 future pythons in one afternoon, which is the kind of leverage no bobcat can match. Nature fighting back is real, and it is genuinely hopeful. But it is not fast enough on its own. The math of up to 100 eggs per female laid every single breeding season is merciless, and the snakes are still winning the numbers. Still, there is something about that trail camera image that stays with you. A 25-pound cat, a species being erased, standing over a 52-pound giant it managed to bring down. It is proof that evolution has not given up, that adaptation is still running even against an enemy this overwhelming, and that in the Everglades, the roles of hunter and hunted are not as fixed as the pythons made them look. The swamp is not done. It is learning. And every so often, on a cold December morning, it fights back and wins. I'm Ambrose Wild. If you want more of what really happens out where the map goes blank, the predators, the invasions, the quiet wars nobody films, stick around. There's another one coming, and it's even stranger than this.